everyone. I am Janet Ott, representing the League of Women Voters of Bellingham and Whatcom County. We are co-hosting tonight's forum with the Skagit County League of Women Voters. Founded in 1920, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization with 800 affiliates across the country. It encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League never endorses candidates or political parties. Membership is open to both men and women of all ages, and we invite you all to join us. This forum is recorded by Robert Clark and the Center for New Media and will be viewable on BTV Bellingham, the City of Bellingham YouTube channel, Mount Vernon, TV 10 and TV 26, and on our League websites and social media sites. Our media partners are the Linden Tribune and the Northern Light. We thank our partners for their generous support, and we hope you will thank them as well. So tonight, we're going to host the candidates for the U.S. Congressional District 1 representative. There are 7 candidates on your ballot for this race. I'll introduce the candidates in alphabetical order. Candidate Robert Dean Mayer is unable to be with us. Jeffrey Beeler Sr., Derek Chartrand, Suzan DelBene, Matthew Heines, Steve Skelton, and Justin Smoak. Members of Congress are responsible for representing the people of their district in the United States Congress. Part of this responsibility includes drafting and voting on legislation in the U.S. Congress. All bills must pass both House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate before they can go to the President to be signed into law. In order to produce better legislation, members spend a lot of time meeting with people who live in the state to talk about what is happening in government and to listen to their suggestions for bills. A representative's term of office is 2 years, and their annual salary is $174,000. We will follow specific rules for this forum. The candidates will have 1.5 minutes to respond to each question and will make a 1-minute closing statement. We ask that candidates be respectful of the time allotted. Questions have been prepared in advance by League members, and each candidate will be asked to respond to the same question. Visual presentations such as photography or graphs are not permitted, and such visual content will be edited out of the recording and will not be aired. The order of the candidates has been determined in advance by the League organizers to ensure a random and fair sequence. There will be approximately 6 to 7 questions. You will have up to 1.5 minutes for your response. So now that the rules are covered, we'll get started. Is the timer ready? So our first question is candidate Beeler. How would you describe the principles that guide you in making personal decisions, and how would those principles be reflected in your role in Congress? Please unmute your microphone and begin.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, League of Women Voters, for hosting this. You know, the principles that guide my thinking, the way I make decisions are all based upon how I grew up in a Christian faith family. We take a lot of the morals that we learn through our faith, and we, push those forward into how we make our decisions in our community. We reach out, we listen to others, and abide by the moral character of what we expect here in America, of loving one another, being a part of the community, being people that show leadership and in making the decisions that we know that are best for our community. Talking to community members is probably one of the most important parts of being a representative. And one of the things I've learned being on the Sultan City Council for the last 11 years is there's a lot of different varying views of people in your district or in your city. And it's important that each one of those gets a chance to have a voice And that's who you are, is that voice for them. Regardless of whether or not you are agreeing with what they're saying, it's still important to take that point into consideration. That's one of the things that I know that I'm very proud of what has happened in my city, is that now when I walk on my city streets, people stop me and say, hey, Jeffrey, what's going on? Because they trust that I will cover their voice. And so that principle is extremely important to have in a representative.
Thank you. Candidate DelBene, please respond to the first question and unmute your microphone.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for pulling us together. This is a critical time in our country, and I hope everyone watching is safe and healthy, you and your families. I am guided by just very fundamental values that are our democratic values, making sure that we treat everyone with respect and dignity, standing up for equality and justice, opportunity for everyone. We are so lucky to live in a diverse district, diverse in our communities, diverse geographically, diverse in our economy. And when we look at the challenges that we face and opportunities that we face across the country, I actually think the 1st Congressional District is a good representation of all parts of our country as well, in terms of the differing views and differing communities and differing economies. So it has been my honor to be able to work with so many people to come up with solutions and then work across the aisle with folks in Congress to pass legislation that makes a difference for everyone in our communities. We have to look long-term at what we are doing so that we continue to build a future that is bright. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your ongoing questions.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Skelton, please respond to the first question and unmute your microphone.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. In terms of the principles that I live my life by, there were 3 changes that came about in midlife for me that have made all of the difference, and that is Christianity, minimalism, and libertarianism. My personal faith is my personal faith, and I don't really discuss that very much, and minimalism is pretty self-evident. I try to collect experiences rather than things, but neither of those have anything to do with how I would govern as a member of the United States House of Representatives. It's that 3rd principle, the principle of libertarianism, that I do not know what is best for your life. I'm 47 years old. I'm just now figuring out what's best for my life. So I want you to be as free as you can be, both personally, your personal freedom. I want you to be able to do what you want. Your economic freedom, I want you to keep what you earn. And by protecting those 2 freedoms, which would be the primary purpose for my tenure in Congress, that's how I would share that 3rd principle of my life with citizens. So that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Heines, please respond to the first question and unmute your microphone.
Let me just say this very as quickly as possible. Hello to the voters of Washington State's 1st Congressional District. There's not enough time to answer these questions in 1 minute. I will note these questions and answer them more completely on my website, voteforheines.com/issues on video. I'm Matthew Heines, and I'm running for the U.S. office, or the Office of U.S. Representative, because you and all America, except for the super rich, are fighting for our lives, for the lives of our families, our businesses, and our communities. Every day we see the incompetence, the hatred, and racism promoted by our elected leaders, who are simply puppets for the super rich who wish to divide and conquer the greatest nation in the history of the world. Americans, for a long time, you've been a commodity to be bought and sold by the legal, political, and economic leaders of this country. Tonight, I, Matthew Heines, a teacher and ex-paratrooper, am here to make a stand, to tell the incumbent you can spend all the millions you want in this election. The people of the 1st District have had enough. The people of the 1st District don't want to listen to any more talk. The people of the 1st District are sick of seeing their homes, businesses, and lives ruined so Fortune 500 companies that contribute to the Democratic Party can be labeled essential, while the small businesses and businesses owners and their families die slow, miserable deaths. I have one thing to say: not on my watch. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and please mute yourself again. Candidate Chartrand, please respond to the first question and unmute your microphone.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, League of Women Voters of Skagit and Whatcom County. Guiding principles that I formulate all decisions are based around my relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. Everything is a biblically based premise, and I look to the Lord for strength each and every day and ask forgiveness where I fall short. So that is the long story short, but the principles that I really respect is people's individuality. I understand that as Americans, we all come from various heritages. We have different life experiences, and it's not for me to judge, and I do not judge that. So from a personal relationship standpoint, I have open arms for everyone, as long as the respect is reciprocated. And that's ultimately the guiding value for me is respect, dignity, and collaboration, because ultimately we are all pursuing our American dream, and we need to feel like we have an ability to accomplish those ends. So that's my guiding principles.
Okay, thank you. So candidate Smoak, please respond to the first question and unmute your microphone.
Thank you for having this forum. I appreciate the opportunity to get the message out there. The general principles that I live my life by revolve around service for others, leaving things in a better place than I found them, and one of the core founding notions of our country, and that's the pursuit of happiness. So since a young age and moving forward in my life, I've always put others' needs first. The concept of servant leadership is important to me. The concept of providing opportunities for others that I may be able to provide is very important. And beyond that, just the idea that, you know, we're put on this earth to be happy. And I think that legislation and things that I would promote are things that provide happiness and joy, and things like healthcare, things like confidence in the economy, and justice and equality, that everyone can enjoy the life that they lead.
Okay, thank you. So here's question number 2. If elected, what are the legislative priorities that you believe will provide the most benefit to the people of your district, and why? And we're going to start with candidate DelBene.
Thank you. We have right now, as we are in a crisis, the most important things we can be working on and making sure that we have a strong response to the public health crisis, to this pandemic, that we also are focused on providing support for our communities and supporting a strong recovery. In Congress, we've passed legislation to help make sure that we have resources for that public health response, and to provide resources to our community members, to our small businesses. But we need to do more. We need testing, contact tracing. We need to make sure that essential services are able to be maintained. We need to make sure that people have housing and healthy food to eat, that they have access to health care. These are our priorities. They are our priorities today. They need to be our priorities heading into the next Congress as well, so that we can continue to make sure that everyone is safe and healthy and has opportunity. So it is a healthcare response, an economic response. That is our immediate need. And then we have to answer the cries for folks across the country for justice and equality, and to address systemic racism. Those are priorities that we have today and are going to continue to be our priorities as we start the new year.
Okay, thank you. So candidate Skelton, please respond to the second question and unmute your microphone.
Thank you very much. You know, in all reality, should I be elected to the House of Representatives, being of the Libertarian Party, I would be a caucus of one. So to be quite frank, there's not a lot of a legislative agenda that I would be able to take to the House. So just speaking of what influence I would try to have, the first and most important pressing matter that we have involves the printing press, the money printing press. The Democrats and Republicans have run a $4.8 trillion deficit this year. They've spent us into a $27 trillion deficit. The last time I did the math, which was just a few weeks ago, but probably already is outdated, each and every one of us owes $185,000 because the Democrats and Republicans have completely abandoned anything that resembles any sort of responsible governance. So the first thing that I would do is whatever I could to get them to stop printing our dollars before they end up littered on the streets like Venezuela. Good news is that if we do have a second go around with this virus, that would solve the toilet paper crisis because we could just use our currency after the Democrats and Republicans have printed so much of it. From there, we need to move as much of our governing back to the states as we possibly can. The 10th Amendment has been ignored for at least 100 years by both parties. And in order to resolve our blue city, red county differences, we need to make Washington, D.C. less important and resolve our differences closer to home in our state capitals.
Okay, thank you. So candidate Heines, please respond to the second question and unmute your microphone.
All right. First of all, we have the first priority is we're going to open up our businesses. This is just insane about you have American people, you have these kinds of people that want to run around ratting on their neighbors. What kind of culture are these Democrats trying to foster? And don't sit there, I'm sorry, candidate DelBene, but I've gone down and talked to Black Lives Matter leaders, and the Democrats are the ones they are really angry at because they have tried for years to get some kind of justice out of the Democrats and have got nothing. So that little story about, oh, we need to respect diversity, et cetera. Well, you're the problem, and all of the African Americans in this country pretty much know that. I'm a teacher. If we do not fix our schools right now, we do not have a country, we do not have a world, and in 20 years, we will be back to rocks and sticks. Right now, you have kids that don't know anything about our own history running around trashing our statues while the incumbent and their party applauds that. Right? Well, these people stood on the line. They towed the line. They stood up for a cause. And that's what America's all about. And all you guys that are here to stand up for a cause, I applaud that. But these things have to happen now. You open up the businesses and you open up the schools and you give these kids what they need, and not this crappy education, but a real education.
Okay, thank you. So candidate Chartrand, please respond to the second question and unmute your microphone.
Thank you very much. The pressing priorities of my campaign have centered around the notion of common sense and civility, and that's what I intend to bring to Congress when elected. We obviously have a pandemic that has changed the course of our economy and our country's narrative right now. As Americans, we must stand united to recognize that together we can make a difference. What I would focus on first, obviously, is assessing the situation when it becomes evident for the next Congress. So a lot can change between now and January, when hopefully I will be sworn in. But there is time for us to assess and get firsthand real-time data that will allow us to put forth legislation that is truly tactical in its deployment. We must make sure we are spending wisely. As a fiscal conservative, we have to make the right choices. Deficit has ballooned, and we need to make sure that we are putting constraints around our spending that understand the needs, but yet is balanced by the limitations that we have and we're putting on our children's future. So I would sponsor, obviously, legislation that would expand the opportunities to understand what the virus is doing to us, and also provide clarity and opportunity for us to re-engage the economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Smoak, please respond to the second question and unmute your mic.
Again, like my libertarian competitor there, as an independent, I would not quite be a party of one, but it would be a party of a handful. So to come and talk about sweeping legislative change would be a bit out of line. However, I think what's most necessary in Congress right now is just to reestablish a belief and trust in our institutions, and a faith and support for our government as it was created in 1776 and has continued to modify and adjust moving forward. The rhetoric that I've heard coming from people talking about America in such negative terms over the weekend, that's normally such a happy weekend, the divisiveness that is poured in from both sides, I think it's time that we put that aside. And as an independent candidate, it would be a signal to the population that there is a different way other than the partisan bickering and backstabbing. So I would use my position as an independent candidate early on to promote common sense, collaborative solutions between both sides that look out for the interests of the average everyday American.
Okay, thank you. And finally, candidate Beeler, please respond to the second question and unmute yourself.
So legislative priorities. 3 of them come to mind right off the top of that. Number 1, immigration. Immigration has been an issue in this country for going on over 40, 50, 60 years, even further back than that. I can remember back when I was a kid, I lived down in Southern California, and there was a family that I was friends with. And one day, one of the family disappeared, and they were a Hispanic family. So I asked my parents, I was only like 8 or 9 years old at the time. And my parents said, well, they had immigration issues. I didn't understand what that meant. But all I know is that 40 years later, I'm looking at immigration being an issue. Why is that? Why is immigration still a problem in the United States of America? We should have resolved this years ago. Number 2, we've got a healthcare system that is just in dire need of a transformation. Back 10 years ago, we were given a line that the Affordable Care Act was going to be the best thing ever created for this country. I'm a business owner. The Affordable Care Act has been anything but great. In fact, it's been anything but affordable. I know as a business owner, I was told you can keep your doctor and keep your plan, but over the last 10 years, I've had to change my plans 3 times. And the last time I only had 1 plan to deal with that had my doctor on it. So we need to really sit back and think about how we change our healthcare situation. And the last thing, you heard it earlier, the budget. We are throwing trillions of dollars of debt on our country, and our kids and our grandkids are going to be the ones that are paying for this. We need to stop as Americans and think about what it is and how we're spending our money. This information that we're getting from Congress about helping us in COVID,
Okay, please.
stimulus packages have gone too far.
Thank you. So here is question number 3. Police violence and racial profiling has dominated the news, and the call for wide-ranging police reform has been loud. What, if any, changes and legislation do you feel are most needed in this area? And we're going to start with candidate Skelton, and please unmute your mic.
Thank you very much. Like many Americans, I was horrified when I saw what that officer did to Derek Chauvin, and I have been horrified by police violence for a long time. Going, through, everyone remembers George Floyd, but this goes all the way back. There's a guy by the name of Daniel Shaver was shot in the hallway of his hotel, begging for his life, peeing his pants with his hands up, and nothing was done about any of this. It's legal for the government to come kill you for just about any confrontation that you have. The most important thing that we can do is to end the war on drugs so we have fewer confrontations between the police and the citizens. Fewer interactions will lead to less police violence. So that's the first thing we have to do, is we absolutely have to end the war on drugs. And then we have to look at just how many other crimes there are in America and all the other reasons the police have for stopping and interacting you, and ask ourselves, is this really worth it? Is this worth enforcing this law, knowing that it could lead to somebody's death? And I'll bring up the name Eric Garner. Eric Garner was selling something that he owned, a cigarette, to somebody else, and the government came and they assaulted him and they killed him right there in the streets. And those police officers were never put on trial. All he did was sell his own property. So we need to look at the laws the police are enforcing to see if they're reasonable for the risk. Thank you.
Thank you. So candidate Heines, please respond to the third question and unmute your mic.
All right, thank you for asking me. Okay, the first thing that we need to talk about here is the problem is not the police. The problem is the lawyers. Every town, every municipality has a building called its municipal building where the courts are and everything. Those courts in the medieval times, those are like the local lord, right? And so the local lord will go out and beat people up and take and get their money from them, whatever. Now these courts are the same thing. They are very educated people. They send the cops out, and this is not about the cops. This is about the lawyers that back up the cops. This is about the crooked legal systems that put people in jail. This is about asset forfeiture. It's about prisons for pay. And every time you have cops, you have to have money coming in to pay for the cops. So what do? They asset forfeiture. They've put people in prison for things they didn't do, et cetera, because they got to have warm bodies. And that's what I mean. You and I are commodities to the legal system, because if you don't have the money to navigate that system, you're screwed. And our system is so full of people that committed no crime or a victimless crime, and they're sitting there rotting when they could have been contributing to our culture and society in a positive way. We are going to reform this justice system, and yes, Black lives do matter.
Okay, thank you. So candidate Chartrand, please respond to question 3 and unmute your mic.
Thank you, Janet. Hey, can you recap that question, please, as we've had a couple?
Sure. It's basically around police violence and racial profiling. And so what changes or legislation do you feel are most needed around this issue?
Thank you. As a person who has law enforcement in my family, my direct family, I take my hat off to the officers that swear their allegiance to the badge and to the people that they serve. And so I tip my hat and say, great job, keep doing what you're doing. Those that have a proclivity to avoiding what the regulations have trained them, we need to have legislation that will go back and identify people that have habitual interactions or infractions of their policing policy. We must be steadfast in the opportunities for all Americans to pursue their American dream. Common sense and civility, which are the cornerstones of my campaign, will be exhibited in every single decision that I make. And the reform of the police department could have a significant impact on people of color and minorities who have been sometimes targeted unjustly. So we must bring back common sense, civility, and that starts with everyone's decision. And I exhibit that every day of my life. So I will look for legislation that will collaborate and bring people together, because together we can make a difference.
Okay, thank you. So candidate Smoak, please respond to the 3rd question and unmute your mic.
One of the fundamental concepts of justice in the U.S. is the rule of law. And that rule of law must apply to everyone, rich or poor, law enforcement or private civilian. And I think we have challenges in policing because we have challenges in getting rid of bad police. And part of this is because they have legal rule of law established collective bargaining agreements, that there's always challenges with regards to public employee unions and how that works out. Because to be honest, some of these police departments, when you look at their record, if they were a private company, they would be declaring bankruptcy and someone would be seeking something else. And that's one of the ways that even collectively bargained agreements get modified. So I think it's important that we find a way through the structure of the collective bargaining process to establish policies and procedures that eliminate the bad cops. Because I believe ultimately most police, a broad majority of police are good. They care about their communities. They're looking to defend their communities, and they hate bad cops more than any of us here do. The other important thing is to eliminate the profit motive from criminal justice, mandatory minimums that somewhat force people into taking plea bargains. Civil asset forfeiture needs to go, and any for-profit prisons as well. Whatever we do in the criminal justice system needs to be because we choose to pay for it as a society, not because someone's getting rich off of it.
Okay, thank you. So candidate Beeler, please respond to the 3rd question and unmute your mic.
So when it comes to police violence, racial profiling, I know from talking to police officers, sheriffs here in my community, friends of mine, neighbors of mine, it has become extremely difficult for them to do their job. There are so many different stipulations that have been put on about how they are able to deal with the situations that they're put into. Sometimes they're sent to situations that a police officer really isn't the best person to be responding to. And I think that's one of the changes that we can be making, because mental illness and drug abuse, if we are able to go in and tackle some of these types of issues, we would reduce the amount of calls that the police would have to be responding to. I know Portland has a program in place that they've been utilizing for the last 20 or 30 years that has really helped reduce the amount of calls that these police officers have to respond to. We need to be looking across the country to see what works. If we can find the things that work and not try to think of something that's new, but use those things that work and then spread that out. And I think that ultimately we'll be able to fix the dilemma that we're in. One of the things I live in a mixed race family. My daughter is, since she is Black, she's always been on social media and she's attacked by these racial remarks. I think social media is one of the things that is perpetuating this in our kids. And they take that from the kids, and then they think it's all full of the rest of their lives here in the community. But I know in the communities that we're in, that's not necessarily the case.
Okay, thank you. And candidate DelBene, please respond to question 3 and unmute yourself.
Thank you. The murder of George Floyd has created a huge outcry across the country, and this is not the first incidence of brutality or discrimination, injustice, the infliction of violence on members of our community, of members in our Black community. And I think that this is a time, this is a movement, because folks are tired, they want to see change. And it's not going to be just one single piece of legislation. We all play a role in standing out and speaking out against injustice, against systemic racism, whenever we see it. And that is the role that we all have to play. But there is legislation that is important as well. And in the House of Representatives, we passed legislation, the Justice and Policing Act, just a few weeks ago. It was led by the Congressional Black Caucus and addressed many issues to make sure that we ban chokeholds or no-knock warrants in drug cases, to make sure we address qualified immunity and put together national standards for training, to have a database that tracks police misconduct, so someone can't go from one jurisdiction to another without having that transparency. So legislation is important. We passed legislation in the House that is critically important to address, but that is far from the only thing we need to do. Every one of us must act.
Okay, thank you. So here is question number 4. Congress has passed economic relief packages to mitigate the financial impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. If you are elected, what priorities would you want included in any upcoming bill? And we're going to start with candidate Heines, and please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. Because where's the second stimulus package? I'll tell you where it is. It's locked up in Congress with crazy people wanting crazy things to come out of this. And why? Because the American people are suffering and dying. And they're going to hold us hostage so that they can take care of their rich friends. And we all know who we're talking about, I'm sure. But the things that have to happen right now is we need a second stimulus, and we need to unlock these businesses, take off the masks, and let's go back to work, because we can't sit here and keep, as one of the candidates said, we can't keep dumping this debt onto our children and our grandchildren. We are the most pathetic generation that ever lived in this country, and we're putting everything, we're tearing up the land, we're putting everybody in debt, and what are these people going to say about us when we're gone? Well, they're going to say about Matthew Heines, that guy stood up, and he said enough is enough. So That's all I have to say about these packages. We need money, and we need it right now, because these people like Inslee and our incumbent, they want you locked up. They want you, I don't know what their ultimate goal is, but you're never going to be out of this coronavirus. You're never going to be out of a mask, and a lot of people are going to be end up starving and dead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So candidate Chartrand, please respond to question number 4 and unmute your mic.
Thank you, Janet. One more time on the recap, please, of the question.
Okay, Congress has passed economic relief packages to mitigate the financial impact of COVID. If you're elected, what priorities would you want included in any upcoming bill?
Thank you. Thanks, Janet. Jeffrey, I just wanted to also extend, as father to father, I wanted to say I share your concern about the bullying that has taken place with your family. So I appreciate that, acknowledge that. Stimulus packages that are required, I think, need to pass the common sense test. We have tried through 12 years prior to the pandemic to let the train run down the track unabated. We put ourselves in situations that have placed now the pandemic with a cherry on the top in terms of the economic recovery needed to take. So what the packages I feel we need to look at is assess where we are needing that immediate stimulus and where we can encourage others to look at spending cuts. We have to have a acknowledgement that we have put ourselves in this situation. And I think that for the first 6 months of my first term, we'll be working across party lines to make sure that we have sensible spending and the stimulus for Americans. John F. Kennedy asked, don't ask what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. I'm going to challenge our constituents to don't ask for more, let's do more. So together we can make a difference.
Okay, thank you. So candidate Smoak, please respond to question 4 and unmute your mic.
I think there's three important things that need to be included in any future stimulus. One is payments need to be made as directly as possible to individuals within the community and have less focus on going through organizations or special interests or towards programs. Just cut people directly a check and let them spend it as they see fit to stimulate the economy. The second issue is there's some businesses that simply can't open because of the conditions of COVID and the various phases that we exist in right now in Washington State. One that comes to mind is music venues and things that are very important to our community and to the arts that simply can't be open right now. And so no matter how much money we give individual people, they can't provide that to those businesses. And so we need to provide special carve-outs to ensure that when it is time for those places to reopen, they have the funds available to do so and they didn't miss out on this first wave. And the third issue that we need to focus on is, dang it, there it went. We need to make sure that we don't spend any more than we have to spend, and that what goes out, and that we protect those that are vulnerable, and that we have reserves available for those that are unable to re-enter the workforce for whatever reason. Perhaps they're in a high-risk group. We need to make sure that those people have the ability to safely stay home and then re-enter the workforce and the economy when it is a time where it's safe for them to do so.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Beeler, please respond to question 4 and unmute yourself.
So as a business owner, one of the biggest concerns I had with the plans that were put out by Congress, I signed up for some of this help back in March on the 19th, and then I sat in a waiting queue. And ultimately, I started one in March, I started one at the beginning of April. When I didn't hear anything by May, I decided I would reapply. Then I got a note back saying, oh, by the way, you're in queue. Well, at least I felt comfortable that I was at least in queue. But unfortunately, it wasn't until June, so 3 months later, that I, as a business owner who was impacted by this, shutdown, finally got some help. So first of all, we need to make this process more streamlined. That would be one of the things that I would like to do. Number two, the way that it was written to keep employees on. Now the House has gone back and they've kind of fixed it. Instead of being 10 weeks, it's now like 24 weeks. But unfortunately, when they passed this bill to begin with, that wasn't the guidelines. And even the bankers who I talked to, they said, look, we don't know what the rules really are. We don't understand the rules. And Congress said, well, they'll get us the rules at some point. What the challenge is we have people in Congress who don't know what running a business is all about. They don't understand the dynamics and the impacts that they're doing by making these laws. So we need somebody in Congress that's going to be able to take that type of experience to explain to others how these rules affect people in business. And then when you pay people unemployment more than they're making on, than we're working, that's another issue, because now we can't get them to work.
Okay, thank you. So candidate DelBene, please respond to question 4 and unmute yourself.
Thank you. I think more resources are very, very important to help address this crisis. That's why in the House we passed the HEROES Act almost 2 months ago, and it's still sitting in the Senate, and we're waiting for them to decide that we need to move forward. I think Mitch McConnell said he needed to take a pause for a while. Well, caseloads have increased, our communities are still struggling, and the HEROES Act addresses many of our most critical needs. The needs of housing, so that we continue to provide housing assistance, nothing more important during the pandemic, to make sure that people have a safe place to live, to have resources for testing and contact tracing, the key tools for our ability to contain the pandemic, resources for state and local government and for our tribal communities, to keep essential public services going, like supporting first responders and our schools. These are important. These are resources that have been asked for in a bipartisan way from mayors, our counties, from governors. There's no reason that the Senate shouldn't help make sure that we pass this legislation. Also, I led an effort to expand what's called the Employee Retention Tax Credit to keep employees on the payroll and connected to their benefits. A very key piece of legislation to provide certainty and to help businesses, especially our small businesses, during this critical time. We need to pass the HEROES Act in the Senate to provide more resources.
Okay, thank you. So candidate Skelton, please respond to question 4 and unmute yourself.
Well, thank you very much. The preparation for and reaction to the coronavirus illuminates very clearly the complete abandonment of responsible governance of the Democrat and Republican Party. We were not prepared for it. The CDC spends 92% of its budget in areas other than novel zoonotic coronaviruses. And then during the month of February, when we knew the virus was coming, the Democrats and Republicans were playing their reindeer games of spy versus spy from Straight Mad magazine, instead of making the preparations that needed to be done. We knew this thing was carried in asymptomatically, but the government didn't do a thing to sample the population to find out how many people already had it. The University of Washington was capable of testing in late January, but because of the CDC and the FDA, they were prohibited from testing, finally broke the law and started testing around mid-March. And it wasn't until April before any private universities were doing anything to sample the population. This abandonment of government, of responsible governance, is also reflected in the reaction by what we did. First off, Congress went home. Mnuchin, Pelosi, and McConnell, the three of them, spent $4 trillion of our money. They just whipped out the printing press. We'll just throw $4 trillion at it. We'll give everyone $1,200 bucks. We'll throw $9,600 bucks on everybody's credit card, give most of it to our buddies in big business, and then we'll step on the Constitution and the 10 amendments, and we'll just kind of hope for the best from there. So as far as the relief package moving forward, I oppose it, but I'm with this.
Thank you. All right, question number 5. Many believe that political polarization is having a negative impact on reaching bipartisan solutions to many of today's issues. If you agree with this sentiment, what will you do to bridge political and philosophical divides? And we'll start with candidate Chartrand. Please unmute.
Janet. No, that's good. Thank you very much. I would concur with that premise there. We need to work across party lines to make a longstanding, viable solution to legislation. My skill set over my career has been building bridges between disparate ideas. And we have to recognize that we are all Americans. That's our first premise. And I will respect everyone regardless of their party. And from that standpoint, establishing those expectations and treating those civilly as part of my campaign's pledge. Common sense and civility rule my life. And there is really magic that can happen when we listen. I've had an opportunity here over the last couple of years to drive Uber part-time in the morning, and I've learned so much from my passengers. I've got firsthand knowledge of imminent concerns that people have on a daily basis. So from that standpoint, we have to reach across party lines. That's going to be one of the first people that I contact is someone of the opposition party to recognize that a dialogue must be created to deliver results to our constituents. So again, together we can make a difference.
Okay, thank you. So candidate Smoak, please respond to question 5, unmute yourself.
Well, I think one of the best ways to end partisanship in Washington, D.C. is to elect independents who don't actually have a party, and like myself, so that we go in there with a blank slate. Now, we don't go in there with a lot of power, but we go in there as a voice, and a voice that we can use to cobble together coalitions. And ultimately, I believe that most of the members of the Democratic caucus don't agree with Nancy Pelosi as much as they vote with her. And what they need is almost an excuse to break away from that claim. And the same on the Republican side in the Senate is a reason to leave that party line and to do what the American people are asking for. And really, there's very little Congress can do. The power is held by the people, and the people need to start punishing the elected officials who don't actually speak for them and enact legislation that is in their best interests. And it might not be something that happens in one congressional session, but it's something that you look at over the course of 4 to 8 years of building momentum towards a broader spectrum. I look and think back to the Blue Dog Democrats, and you never hear from those guys anymore, but they were actually a very reasonable and moderating force in Congress. And we need more groups like that can just put the needs of the people first and focus on the people's agenda and not the agenda of the special interests.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Beeler, please respond to question 5 and unmute yourself.
I think Derek, made a really good comment, which is we are all Americans in this. And that's what's so fabulous about what we have as a great country. The challenge is when we go back to DC, it seems like attitudes change. So one of the things that I'm going to be bringing back is a leadership quality that allows for all Americans in my district to be able to come to me regardless of their point of view. In my community, I've been reelected 3 times. And one of the reasons is because people respect the fact that I listen to all sides of the story. In fact, I have my own point of view, but I don't let that destroy the way that we're going to proceed in our community, because it's a community's perspective that we need to be looking at. And sometimes we can learn a lot of things from a different perspective, ways that we don't realize, can be taken a different way. And so it's that type of experience that I would like to take back to Congress. I've been able to work across, that party line in a lot of senses in my community. And I believe that if we had more people in Congress that were willing to actually talk to the other side, to actually work things through, find that common goal, that commonality, we could get more done, because we would probably agree on more things than we realize. But unfortunately, we've got such bipartisanship going on that they're not even talking anymore. We've got such people that are following the leadership of their party. They're rubber stamping what is their leadership is saying, and they're not moving forward to get things accomplished in Congress.
Thank you. Okay, candidate DelBene, please respond to question 5 and unmute yourself.
Thank you. One of the things that has been happening over the many cycles is ongoing gerrymandering, and this is definitely redistricting has created bright blue and bright red districts. We don't have many purple districts left in our country, and I am very honored to represent one of those few remaining purple districts, because when we have a district like ours that represents every point of view, and I think when our district was drawn, it's described by former Senator Slade Gordon as the most evenly divided district in the country politically, it created an incredible opportunity for me to be able to work with folks with many different views, because that's how we come up with better solutions to problems. That's how we learn. And so it has been my honor to have that opportunity from working with our farmers and sitting on the Ag Committee to address agricultural policy, working with manufacturers, working in technology, but also working with our families in our rural communities to families in our urban communities, and understand that while sometimes people use different words and build walls, that we actually have many things that people agree on, and that's an incredible opportunity. I've been working on many pieces of strongly bipartisan legislation on healthcare, on low-income housing, on technology, issues like privacy, and so we'll continue to do that going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Skelton, please respond to question 5 and unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. It's interesting that the Congresswoman describes the district as purple, perhaps the most evenly divided in the country, when she's voted 100% with Nancy Pelosi this Congress and at least 95% with Nancy Pelosi in every Congress that she has been a member of. But beyond that, what I want to point out is that a lot of this political polarization is just bread and circuses. On the issues that really matter, debt, war, corruption, and scandal, there isn't an inch of difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. You want $1 to $4 trillion deficits moving forward, you can vote either way. If you want a military budget 3 times the size of China and 15 times the size of Russia, they just passed $750 billion this week. You can vote for the Democrat or Republican, huge bipartisan majorities on either of those. Of course, we've all seen the scandal. We've seen the embarrassment of these two parties. You can really vote either way. I'm with Justin. Mr. Smoak, and the most important thing that we can do is stop electing Democrats and Republicans, because those two parties are irredeemable. They have abandoned responsible governance, and moving forward, it is time for the citizens, as our founding fathers envisioned, a House of Representatives not full of career politicians and professional politicians like our incumbent, but rather citizens like Mr. Smoak or myself, who go to Washington, serve a term or two, and then return to private life. We do that. That's how we end this bread and circus ridiculous partisanship.
Okay, thank you. So Candidate Heines, please respond to question 5 and unmute yourself.
So polarization in Congress, I'm going to make this really simple. This seat for these guys that are independents, like myself, this seat belongs to the people of the 1st Congressional District. Doesn't belong to the Republicans, doesn't belong to the Democrats. So when I'm there filling that seat, I'm going to listen for the best deal, and I'm going to vote for that deal. If it's a Democrat, it's a Republican. If it's, I don't care who it is, but we're going to get the best deal for the people of the 1st Congressional District. We're not voting with Nancy Pelosi. We're not voting with Donald Trump. We're voting for the best deal, and we will sell our vote dearly. So that's how we're going to battle polarization. And all you guys that say, yeah, the big problem is Democrats and Republicans, that's exactly right. It's a bunch of 7th graders encouraged by a rotten media to sit here and say horrible things about each other while all the country's watching and everybody's wondering, well, who's minding the store? Well, it's pretty obvious nobody is. So again, this seat belongs to the people of Washington State's 1st Congressional District. And I talked to a yellow vest from Utah at the Black Lives Matter movement. He said, I only vote for referendums. And if there's some way we could just referendum and you could tell me how to vote for people in the 1st District, I would vote the way you told me to vote, because this seat belongs to you. Thank you for your question.
Okay, thank you. So this is question number 6, and it is the final question. Access to good internet service and computers has been essential for students to continue classes during the COVID-19 epidemic. What actions would you support to ensure that all students have quality and reliable resources needed for online learning? And we're going to start this time with candidate Smoak. Please unmute yourself.
I think this is especially critical now as the debate is somewhat raging about, what type of learning will happen in September when our students go back to school, if they go back to school at all. And one of the biggest criticisms I hear from folks I know up here in Whatcom County that might be a little more rural is that they just don't have the internet bandwidth going to their homes. especially folks with 3 and 4 kids, to be able to satisfactorily do online Zoom classes and Zoom learning. And as we look at where our economy goes from here, it's going to be more automated. It's going to be more tied to a cloud. And so it's absolutely critical for the future of not just students learning in the short term, this coming school year and in school years to come, but for the businesses and the industry that we're going to be seeking and that's going to be driving our economy, that we have better broadband access across the nation and into our rural communities. And there's a variety of technologies that we can pursue for that. And I think as a federal government, we need to provide great incentives for people and for regions to invest in their broadband and data capabilities.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Beeler, please respond to question 6 and unmute yourself.
Yeah, so we've learned a lot under the COVID scenario here, where our kids who had been going to school and learning have been put in a scenario where some aren't able to even connect with their teachers anymore. So this is an issue moving forward to fall when we start classes back up. That's one of the questions we have to ask ourselves. How do we do this? And I know a lot of the school districts have been creating plans, maybe only having a couple of days a week school and, having half the school come one day and the other half come to the other. These are the great creations that Americans are good at. We know how to solve problems. One of the things that they've done is they've had roving Wi-Fi hotspots, or they've been able to, get kids the computers so that they can work on their school, even though they may not have Wi-Fi. So we've been totally evolving over time during this situation. Ultimately, like in Whatcom County, like you heard, rural areas, it's hard to get internet. And so that expanding technology is coming. It's just not here yet. I've been homeschooling our kids. Our family's homeschooled our kids since the beginning. So over 20 years ago, we started this. And one of the things that I found was, you can do school without the internet. You can do school without public school, in fact. Those are the things and questions that our families are having to ask ourselves right now. Is really the public school going to be the decision we make, or are we going to go a different direction? Because maybe they're actually learning more at home than they were going to public school.
Okay, thank you. Candidate DelBene, please respond to question 6.
Thank you. When we look at the disparities, especially in opportunity that exists in our communities, one of the biggest has been the gap in technology and foundational infrastructure. Our district is probably one of the biggest technology hubs in the world, and you can go an hour from the campus of Microsoft and be in a place where we don't have rural broadband or even very good cell service. So building out infrastructure is critically important. Making sure that we have connectivity. We need to map, make sure that we check off every area, because even just basic map of where we have connectivity has been something the federal government has struggled to provide. And in the infrastructure package that we just passed last week in the House, we put important resources in for rural broadband, so we get that deployment out there and cover all of our communities, because this does have long-term impact in terms of educational opportunity, but also in terms of economic opportunities in our regions, in our beautiful towns. I remember talking with the mayor of Concrete about some of the challenges he has had getting businesses who might want to live in a beautiful area to move there because basic infrastructure wasn't available. We also have to look at communities where infrastructure is there, where it's not affordable, and make sure there's affordability so that we have ongoing access. And lastly, we have to address consumer data privacy and put people in control of their most personal information. Thank you.
Candidate Skelton, please respond to question 6.
Okay. The first thing I would like to do is read the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution. It says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved respectively to the states or to the people. Now, getting broadband to children's houses for schools is probably very important, but that doesn't mean that it's the purview of the federal government. Our founding fathers did not design a federal government to meet all of our needs cradle to grave and to rule over us in all of our areas of life. These things are to be left to the states to figure out. Now, regarding opening school though, I was reading I don't know the exact initials, but the representative group for 67,000 pediatric doctors say that it's time to open the schools. And we absolutely do need to open the schools. The government takes our tax money, and part of the taking of that tax money is to care for our kids during the day so that we can go to work. And that's how we get out of recession, is by Americans working. And the government has a responsibility to educate the kids and to take care of them so that the parents can go to work. So it's important that we open the schools. The pediatric doctors say that that's safe. If you've got some elderly teachers or something, or health impaired teachers, you can move them out, find some other way. But let's open the schools, and let's let the states figure out how to get internet to everybody's house.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Heines, please respond to question 6.
All right, well, I have a very simple question. Get the kids back in the schools. Why do we need to pay a bunch of money that's going to end up back in Microsoft and our incumbents' pocket because of their stock investments, whatever? No, the schools are there to teach the kids, and they're not going to learn unless they are in some kind of an educational system. And so that's my answer. And I want to touch on this coronavirus issue, which we haven't had a chance to talk about. Now, the Chinese knew they had the coronavirus, and they sent it over here. They sent 4,000 people into our country as soon as they knew these guys had the coronavirus, right? That is like a military attack. So everything that we have done since then, well, Amazon is getting rich, Costco is getting rich, Bill Gates is getting rich, and I'm sure our incumbent is getting super rich off of her stock shares. Well, I'm saying that we're going to stop jumping through hoops because of China, and we're going to hold China accountable for what they've done. Now, people all around the world are calling for accountability from China. Even our Secretary of State, Pompeo, has said the leader of China is a ne'er-do-well, and he has no business running a country. We need to address that issue and stop trying to let these big companies make money off of their ally China's attack on us. And that's my answer to your question.
Okay, thank you. And candidate Chartrand, please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Janet. I'm going to ask for a re-ask of the question, please.
Okay, access to internet service and computers has been essential for students for their classes during COVID. What actions would you support to ensure all students have quality and reliable resources for online learning?
Great, thank you. I, like our incumbent, I do support the rollout of a broadband offering. We have to utilize our technologies and our ingenuity to allow students in rural communities to have access to education, whether it be online or in person. I'm an advocate that we need to have common sense in the deployment. To me, that makes sense for those students of the rural communities specifically, but it also would enhance our opportunity to deploy and reduce healthcare costs, as broadband would be the facilitator of a telemedicine opportunity if the infrastructure is there. So we can maximize our return on investment by utilizing that platform for multiple services provided. So I would support the legislation that would allow for those rural communities, as well as hyperspeed for obviously the closer in communities, to have an option that would allow growth in technology to demonstrate. So.
Okay, thank you. So candidates, you now have an opportunity to make a 1-minute closing statement. So we're going to start with candidate DelBene. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thanks again to the League of Women Voters for hosting this important forum. This is probably the most important election of our lifetime, so that we are able to have a Congress and a White House that will stand up for all people in our country. We'll fight for a strong, clean energy economy. We'll fight for opportunity and our values to support every single person, to make sure that we have access to, that everyone has access to quality health care. and that we have a clean environment. I represent a beautiful district. We all need to make sure that we maintain that going forward for future generations. So please make sure that you take the time to vote. This is critical. Thanks for being engaged. And thanks again to the League of Women Voters. I appreciate your support.
Thank you. Okay, candidate Skelton, you have 1 minute to make your closing statement.
Okay, I've got to get that timer up on my screen. There it is. Okay, thank you very much. My candidacy, my campaign is essentially 3 declarations. And what I ask is that if you agree with the 3 declarations, that you vote for me. The first is that the Democrat and Republican regime in Washington, D.C. is irredeemable. They have long ago abandoned responsible governance, and that we must stop electing them and elect other parties or elect independents. On matters of war, debt, corruption, and scandal, there is no difference at all between the Democrat and Republican parties. The second declaration of my campaign is that to better resolve our blue city, red county differences, we need to make Washington, D.C. less important and make more of our decisions closer to home. Our founding fathers did not envision a federal government that ran every aspect of our lives and solved all of our problems. They envisioned a federal government that provided for the mutual protection of the country and that protected the personal and economic freedoms and liberties of the citizens. And that's what we need to return to.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Heines, you have 1 minute for your closing statement, and please unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah, thanks to the League of Women Voters for having me on. At this time, this is a very important time for women, one of the most important times in our history. Right now, we have Ghislaine Maxwell sitting in a jail, and she has been getting women, young ladies, young girls for Jeffrey Epstein and a number of prominent individuals. And I wonder how many of those individuals contribute to our Democratic incumbent. So the question for this election is, do the rich get to commit crimes against our citizens, our president, our women, our children, steal from the treasury, divide our country while they use the China virus to destroy our rights, our freedoms, and our lives? Friends and neighbors, this election is about which candidate is going to go to Washington and defend your equal right to have a business, an education, a quality of life, and assurance they won't replace you in your job with cheap labor, a robot, or some AI nightmare. There are those who talk the talk and those who walk the walk.
Thank you. And candidate Chartrand, you have 1 minute for your closing statement, please, and unmute yourself.
Janet, I want to thank you and the rest of the League of Women Voters for the opportunity to come this evening and share with you my campaign. Again, my cornerstones and what I will represent you in Congress with is common sense and civility. And I'm going to focus very hard on providing opportunities educationally for our students K through 12. We need education reform to allow all students to have their opportunity at their American dream. Term limits is the other element of my campaign. Since my inception of my campaign, I have pledged to always serve 4 terms in Congress, and that way fresh ideas will have the opportunity to grow. Together, we can make a difference. Mrs. DelBene, 8 is enough.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Smoak, you have 1 minute to make your closing statement, and please unmute yourself.
I would also like to thank the League of Women Voters for this forum. As an independent candidate who's brand new to politics and has no party behind me, this was one of the few opportunities I have to get my message out there. So much thanks to the League of Women Voters. Over the past 10 years, 7 out of 10 Americans, if you ask them on any given day, would disapprove of the job Congress was doing. That's regardless of who's in the White House and who's in charge of the Speaker of the House. The one thing that seemingly unites our bitterly divided country is our collective lack of faith in the federal legislative branch. This branch, we have this lack of faith because the legislation that gets passed caters to special interests, big business, and the elites, but has very little in terms of common sense and basic promise to average Americans. I promise more efficient service delivery and getting the government out where it doesn't need to be involved. I hear and share the frustrations of my fellow citizens on the left and the right with our Do Nothing Congress, and I intend to do something about it.
Okay, thank you. And candidate Beeler, you have 1 minute for your closing statement. Please unmute yourself.
All right, thank you. League of Women Voters, I appreciate the time. You know, back a few months ago, my community asked me if I would run. They said, you have stepped up to the plate here in the city of Sultan, and we love what you have done. You've been a great representative for the community. And because of my business experience, because of my community involvement in general, working with the YMCA and with the churches, they all saw that as leadership skills. We need to quit sending a rubber stamp back that doesn't represent our community anymore. We need someone that will garner results and not give excuses. It's needing that leadership of being able to actually reach across the aisle and bring people together. That's what I've done here, and I want to take that back, so I humbly ask for your vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, to all the candidates, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, we thank you for coming tonight, and especially we thank you for your commitment to running to office. Good night.